Hello, Ken Spriggs here with part 3 of my ATST buddy build with Tim Striner, the glue and paper guy. And we're presenting different aspects of what we're building, obviously, since he's working on some different approaches than I am. Now on mine, I initially started working on the fire effects, the explosion effects, which I initially talked about doing on this. And got quite a bit done, and it was looking kind of cool. But then I came across a video on YouTube that was suggested to me by a modeler called LPJ Models. And he built this same version of the ATST from The Mandalorian. And his had a really cool design to it, paint scheme, modifications, things of that nature, which, quite honestly, you can't see in the episode. I viewed the episode several times, and it's just dark the whole time, and you really can't make out any detail on it because of that, other than the obviously glowing red eyes. So I contacted him, and he gave me permission to use some of his images from his build, which he did an amazing job on, just a fantastic job. So his is superior to mine, so don't judge me. But he had gotten some images, which I found on the internet as well, of a stand-up cardboard cutout of it that shows some really nice paint schemes on it, that the Raiders must have modified it, and some other things that they did. So I'll kind of show those, but it really looks pretty cool the way that they had designed it. And it's a shame they didn't show more of it in the episode, but I think they wanted to go with the glowing red eyes as the main thing that you remember. So I'm going to light up the red cockpit in it, but I'm going to go more with the focus on the actual craft itself, the paint scheme, the modifications, and still do the diorama, but I'm not going to have it exploding, so that you can see how beautiful this is. So let me go ahead and show you my my part of the build first, and then we'll go ahead and see what Tim has accomplished. All right, so to get some ideas for the paint scheme, first of all, these are some images that LPJ Models also mentioned from the internet of a cardboard cutout of this Raider modified ATST, which is odd that it's the only pictures out there that I've been able to discover, and he said the same thing. Now, here are some images from his build, from his site, and I will link that in the description. So he did a fantastic job of capturing that. And then you can see the red legs and the gray top. And then there's also some white markings, as you can see, mostly on the top, but also on the legs. There are the panels that he manufactured, that he cut out for his side. He has his strapped on with some twine, which looks kind of cool. And he has some little foliage that's stuck into it as well, which is kind of awesome. It's a little better look at the stripes on the legs and how those are created. And there you can kind of see more of the stripes on the top. There are those parts he fashioned covering the knuckles there, which are pretty cool, and I want to try to make those as well. And some really cool weathering in the back detail of it, and also in that part there in the middle. So, all right, just a fantastic job. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at some of the modifications that I'm doing to the kit as well. All right, so beginning the modifications, the first thing I did was that the paint scheme is very much different than what I had originally gone with. So in order to give it a better base coat to begin with, I repainted over the main parts of the ATST. So what I did was, this whole right leg, including the part up here, and the lower half below this knuckle, including the feet, are going to be more of a dark red that's really chipped away, and then it has some white stripes painted on it, and some other little details that the Raiders put onto it. Now the rest of it, this whole part here, the top arm of this leg here, and of course the cockpit part at the top piece, that kind of thing. These are going to be ultimately lighter gray with a darker undercoating that's going to be coming through some chipping. So I put a dark gray over top of these parts. I put a sky gray over the other lighter parts, and then I went over with a little bit of white because I'm going to use a technique that I've used once before on my John Carpenter The Thing diorama, which is the hairspray and salt technique to get a lot of really fine chipping and colors coming through. So to the red, I want to have a lighter gray coming through. The other part, since they're going to be a light gray, I need a darker gray to come through, so it's a bit of a contrast. I'll show that more when I get into it. So what I'm doing right now is that there's a few modifications that I have to do on the head of it. The main parts are these pieces right here, which go in the side, as you can see. It's not glued on, it's just sat there. They have some extra armored panels, just some patchwork cut up pieces over top of them, assuming there was some kind of hole or damage or something to the plating, and they just patched it up. So there's some of that on there on both sides. And then also right here, there's a bit of some grating. It looks like with just some wire that I can reproduce onto that as well. Pretty much everything else is going to be mostly painting. There are some odd kind of tarps or covers twisted around these two knuckles, which I'll kind of figure out how that's going to be as well. But other than that, the majority of it just has to do with how it's painted, and it does have a unique paint scheme that went with this set. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and use these thin styrene pieces that I have here, and maybe some of these pieces here. I can even cut off some of these panels or leave some lines in them, just to make some patchwork kind of panels, like I said, that are going to go over top of these. All right, so as I showed in the time lapse, I used some of the materials that I showed previously. The one that worked the best was this right here. It's just supposed to be like a paneling or floor or something, but it was nice because I can cut out little sections that had some detail and some lines in it, and just, I wanted it to be random and just kind of an odd configuration. And they're not the same on both sides either. Then I took some sandpaper, sanded off a little bit of the paint to give it some plastic to stick to, and glued them both down. So there we go. So you can see that it adds some character to it. And that's what they actually did in the episode. They had some plates built up onto these, assuming that they were damaged. So I'll get these painted as well with some different colors. And I'm going to do some different dark grays and some different colors on these to give it some character. And all of this is going to be weathered, obviously, and then the paint chipping effect. So, okay, looking pretty cool. Let me go ahead and work on the grading on the front. All right, there we go. So I just used some 0.020 styrene strips. I sanded off the little part here first of all to give it some plastic to stick to. And I put down the horizontal ones first, and then the vertical ones as well. And it's supposed to be kind of rough because it's just a grate that they took from something and attached it on for some reason. All right, and then of course that'll be painted as well onto here and weathered, so it'll look like a part of it. So okay. All right, one other modification I noticed is that they seem to have strapped on some plates over these openings in the legs. Might have been a weak point or some type of a servo unit they were protecting. So I put another piece of that styrene that has the little pattern in it, cut some odd pieces and glued those on, and then I just took some of that same stripping, the .020, and just kind of glued it into the joints to look like it's lashed on. And I may throw on some a little bit of drop of CA glue and a kicker just to kind of hold those in place so they don't break loose, to kind of add to that detail. So, okay. All right, so I have all the parts ready to go, and I'm going to start doing the hairspray and salt technique, which I'm just going to demonstrate a little bit of, and then I'll do the rest of it. So I took some hairspray, and it's just some Aquanet in a can. I just sprayed it into a bowl. It takes it a while to dry, so I have some time to work with it. And I'm just using this cheap brush to apply it on. And then I have this little cup full of some regular table salt. Is all that I'm using. So all that you do basically is you apply it on. Let me show you. So you want to kind of do it in a random pattern, because what's going to happen is the hairspray is going to dry and the salt is going to be left behind. So then the salt, once it dries, I will, just do this a second. I will spray paint over top of it, and then I can use, and then when that dries, I can use water to loosen up the salt and remove it, and the little bits of paint will come off, the acrylic paint. I'm trying to do this under the camera, through the camera, so let me try to get a little closer here. And you want to keep in mind, anywhere you put the salt, it's going to remove that paint and leave what's underneath behind. So you don't want to coat the entire thing. As you can see, I put it on randomly. But there's some pretty good patches that are going to come off. All right, so this one's done. So I'm going to set this aside, let that dry. You want to give that a few hours to dry, because you don't want to paint over wet hairspray, of course. That would not work. That would be a problem. So let me try to show you here on the flat part. All right, so I can put some, you can put this down pretty liberally. And it won't hurt anything for it to dry in places where you don't put salt. It's not a problem. All right, there we go. So again, a few spots, but it's gonna chip away. And the nice thing about it is that the salt granules are so fine that they will leave just the smallest little blemishes. So they'll look more in scale on this than it would be if you try to use drops of chipping medium and pull off too big of a section, that kind of thing. You want to kind of be careful that it's in scale. So, all right. So let me continue on with this. And then, like I said, once this dries in a few hours, I'll go ahead and put the top coat colors over top of it. And then that way, when I rub those off, so for example, on this one, when I rub it off, I'm going to get some dark gray here, I'm going to get some metal here, some light gray over here. And that's why I painted some different panels. So you're going to get a different effect. And it's going to be kind of a hodgepodge on these parts. As far as these other ones, the upper parts, I have that dark gray, and down below I have more of a really light gray. So I get that coming through, so, okay. All right, so I finished the salt and hairspray over the entire surface as I demonstrated. To finish it all up, once I got the salt all down, I just took the can of hairspray and I just sprayed it lightly over the entire thing on all the parts, just to finally set the salt in. And it seems to have worked pretty well and set it in place, because when you're airbrushing paint, you tend to blow off a few grains of salt here and there. And so I wanted to make sure that most of it stayed. And I'm using this little box. I just happen to have this little nicely sized box to keep all the salt and everything contained so it's not going everywhere. So then I went ahead and once it dried, I let it sit for a good 5 or 6 hours. There's no set time frame on it, just when it's completely dried, because you definitely don't want to be putting paint over top of the hairspray that's wet. But I went over and I made a custom red using some Hall red mostly and flat red. And then I painted the left leg there completely, as you see, and the right leg just up to the knuckle. And then I initially went over the gray parts with a sky gray that I lightened a bit with some white, but it was a little too white and I didn't like how it looked, so I went back over it with a light sea gray, which is a little more gray on the greenish tone, which I think is a nice contrast to the red, and I like that contrast a lot better. So there's all the parts that are painted gray, and I wanted it to be light enough that when I chip off the salt, it's going to see the darker gray underneath and it's going to have a nice contrast. But dark enough that there are going to be some white accents mostly on the head of it that have to stand out over the gray. So I couldn't just do a really light gray. And I tried to keep some of it kind of patchy, but that'll look really good when I put the white accents on it. There's also some white accents, some stripes on the legs as well. So I'm going to go ahead and do those while the salt is still in place because I want that to be chipped off as well. So let me go ahead and put on the white accents and let that dry, and then I'll be ready to go ahead and show how I remove the salt. All right, so I completed painting on the extra details. So I have the white stripes on the face, stripes on the legs. And I deliberately kept these imperfect. They're not supposed to be perfect. It's like they just took a big thick paintbrush and just slapped on some paint. They didn't really use stencils. These aren't official markings or anything like that. I got the little X's on the little thing there for how many people they killed, I guess. A little skull and crossbones kind of thing. It's kind of rough. All right. These parts aren't attached. I just kind of stuck them on. Same with the guns on the outside. So let me go ahead and kind of show you now, because now I'm ready to go ahead and remove the salt to show the underlying color underneath to make it look like it's paint chipping. So I have a bowl of water. It's a little warm. It doesn't have to be, but warm helps a little bit to dissolve the salt a little better than just cold water. All right, and I'm just using this brush, and this is the same brush I used to put down the hairspray. It's just a cheap brush that I got. All right, so we'll start with this one. So there's no definite technique. All you're doing is getting it wet. And it doesn't matter how wet you get it. It's only going to dissolve the salt, remove the salt. It's not going to remove everything else. So I kind of liberally wet it. Let it start to soak in a bit. And I wouldn't really dunk the part. That's not necessary. If you put it under the water too long, all the hairspray under the paint is going to start to come off, and then you're just going to get, you know, a lot of weathering, which you don't need. And you'll kind of see, just kind of lightly brush it. Once it starts to get to the salt, it'll start to come loose and you'll see it. And all these bumps will go away because that's just the salt. You don't want to force it too much. If you get a spot that you do want to be a little more worn, you can always rub it more with the brush and be a little more aggressive, and then that'll That'll remove it. You see some of it starting to come loose. And really it just depends on how much paint you have over top of it, because it has to work its way through the paint and then onto, you know, to get the salt wet so it dissolves and comes loose, of course. There you go, you can see some of it. You see right there, some of that dark sticking through. Over here, there's some lighter. And again, I'm just lightly brushing this. I'm not exerting a ton of pressure on it. See, that's coming across a little easier over here. There we go, see that? Very cool. Some up here. And the beauty of this technique is that it definitely gives you a much more realistic look, because it removes just bits and pieces, just tiny, you know, the size of a salt crystal. But it looks nice and realistic and chipped off, so. All right, let me keep working on this and then I'll show you how that looks when it's completed. All right, so it's coming along nicely. Just to kind of show you a contrast. So here's the leg I haven't done yet, and you can see it's still pretty well all the red that I painted. And here's the other side that I did. And you can see how chewed away and chipped away and gnarled it is, which is how it looks, how it would look, because you're going to have a lot of worn out paint. And I'm not totally done yet. I still might come back over with some washes, some oil washes, or some weathering powders and that kind of thing. Same with down here. You can see all the little chipping paint. And the cool thing is that it has really tiny bits and pieces, so it looks realistic, as opposed to if I just dug off pieces, or if I used you know, like something that would pull away all the paint. But then you have some spots like this that's really chewed up, because maybe there was a lot of play under this and it looks a lot more chewed up. Some of that's still wet too. It'll look different once it dries. So all right, but looking pretty cool. So let me go ahead and finish working on that. All right, so as I showed in the previous stills, I wanted to recreate those crappy looking covers over the back knuckles, which you can't see very well in the image. But the YouTube video I watched, he made them onto his and they came out really cool. So I just took some thin styrene, I think it's .020, and I cut it and formed it and kind of molded it down to where it needed to start to be, put a little hole in it. But then I took a little tool that I kind of fashioned myself. It's off right now, but this is the tip from a low temp glue gun that I glued a piece of metal rod in the end. And then I stuck it onto this plastic clamp, which obviously it melted into place on, which is fine. And I just cannibalized that part out of it with the cord. I can plug it in and it gets warm. It doesn't get hot so that it's going to melt the plastic, but it is warm, so I'm able to like mold it and shape it like you can see there. So it looks more like it's a piece of thick cloth or leather or something like that. All right, so that was pretty cool. So I'm gonna make one more for the other side, and then I just gotta paint those. I'm thinking more of like a brownish, leatherish kind of look on it, badly stained, of course. So, all right, let me get that on there, and then we'll finish this up. One more thing I forgot to mention. I just took some black rubber-coated wire, and I put some holes through it with a pin vise, and I just put those through so it looks like it's lashed down. I didn't want to wrap it all the way around the joint because that wouldn't make much sense. If the joint moved, it's just going to break. So what I did was I used some super glue with an accelerant, and I just glued it down onto the part here so it looks like it's attached. And the same with back there. Obviously this isn't going to be moving, but it gives it that appearance like it's lashed down. And those I'll leave black. The rest of it I'm going to head and paint with the colors on there. So, okay. All right, and here is my finished, painted, weathered, modified ATST. Really happy with how that turned out. Let me get some close-up shots here so you can see the really chewed up paint coming off and looking real nasty. I don't have that top pressed down in all the way yet or attached because I still have to put some lights in it. My little modifications. Let me just kind of work my way down. So I got the little red leg on this side with the little X's for their kills. The striping on the legs at the bottom. Over on the other side, I got the little skull and crossbones. The bottom part of the red leg. And again, when I get closer, you can see the salt and hairspray technique, which works really good in just removing tiny little bits so that it looks realistic instead of big patches. There's one of my metallic plates that they added on to build it up. I really like the look of the patina kind of going around that curved part. Looks pretty cool with the, sorry if the shakiness, the speckled. There's one of my leatherish looking covers over here, which I painted, put a little bit of oils on just to make them look stained and spotted. There's the other one, and you can see the little black cords holding them in place, which I think turned out pretty cool. You have the weathering on the back. Looks really sufficiently dirty and rusted and worn and beat up for probably sitting out in the woods for a long time before they even found it, the raiders, and repurposed it and painted it and tried to add it on. And underneath, a lot of chewed up paint as well, so. Sorry. All right, so I'm very happy with how that turned out. And I'm glad that I'm taking the route that I am, where I'm not going to be using the explosions, because now that I know it has a definite design to it and it's a pretty cool design, I don't want to have that explosions be the focus. I want this to be the focus. So I'm going to still have the red lights in it when I do the diorama. So, all right, fantastic. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at Tim's video and see what progress he has made on his build of his Papercraft version.
I'm the glue and paper guy. We've already seen a montage of how I create parts for my ATST. Here I'm going to show you how I drew them. I'll take you through some of my source material, and I'll show you how I prepare them for the laser. The end of the video will be the finished part. Next go around, I'm going to have a finished body for you. And finally, I think we're going to paint it. So what you see here on the screen is the totality of the parts for a single thigh. This is the top, that's the middle, there's the bottom, these are the connecting pieces, and these bits and pieces are the glue that hold it to the body by layering it all together. I can show you how I got here by panning over here. This is the original size of what the hips, the main body of the hips will be. The red line here. So I sketched out some basics. Where am I going to put the joints? How's it going to line up? And work with a beginning part. I went from there to realizing how I would have to skin it down and size it to make it actually work the way it should. And I finally come down to a finished part. A brief demonstration of how I put the parts together. These shapes are made up of individual bits and pieces. And so first I join them and then I cut the holes in them. It's almost like you're making it in a physical place. So I connect these together. There's the popsicle stick. The three shapes that were individual shapes are now all of a piece. Now I can push the popsicle stick in the background and you can see the holes for the axles. So we do a little more math. I'll select all those parts. I selected what I want to cut from, and then I selected what I want to take away, and I simply subtract. And now I have holes in the bottom. That process follows through for all of these parts, no matter how complex or how repeated I do. From here, I exported to a image, a PNG file, which happens to be very amenable to vectoring in the software for my laser that I use. Here then is the laser interface for the controlling software for the laser, and this is the resulting drawing. These are the vectors, the lines that comprise the shapes, and these blue lines are how the laser will scooch back and forth across it and cut it. Here's a look at the source of all of this. We started with SF Papercraft's pattern. That was printed on A4. And you can see the level of detail and his care and focus in creating the pattern. I went from there and took these reference photos by a guy who calls himself Forbidden Plastic. These reference photos are of a production model and very thorough. I reached out to Forbidden Plastic. I got no response on this particular platform, so I'm hoping he forgives me for showing his pictures. There he is. All the detail that you could possibly want, all the way down to the bottom. The last piece is the first piece. This is where I found the original pattern. This is the SF Papercraft site. This gentleman makes some really incredible stuff. You see the range of the paper patterns that he creates. There's our ATST. I have the TIE Fighter. I think I've downloaded a large number of his patterns, and many paper crafters make this R2-D2. It's one of the finest out there. So there's a range, and this guy is worth a look. He's worth checking out. I should have provided a link, and I'll do so again. So from here, I'll show you the legs. We'll wrap it up for this time and look forward to finishing the whole body and having a unpainted ATST ready to show whole and entire. Chicken Walker Mark II has two legs to stand on. I have these laid out so that we see the outside and the inside. There's some additional detail on the inside which is not present on the filming model. Otherwise, 90% faithful. Somehow there's so much rightness to this that I am astounded. And it looks so perfect. That's just two layers of paper, laser cut. The Mark II toe, much closer to the original. And we're filming black on black here, but still. You can see there the toe pretty well. These are flat sections, filed down nicely, and we've used the snot out of super glue. That joint's not quite right, but it's close enough. That could be a paper tube. It is not. I'm too lazy. That is styrene tubing. Eventually I'll make in my parts, small parts page, something that matches this. This is just 2 sheets of paper formed and then folded over, again to really look like the real deal. When I finished out the toe, I found that I could see the end of the tube, and so I used one of these ubiquitous little parts to fill that. It turned out it was exactly right, so I must have done something right. This detail is present on the filming model, including the little tiny strips. This is that marvelous paper clay. It's a very thin layer, but you can see that it's been sanded down to get a great profile, and the scratch marks and the other stuff are not outside the realm of correctness for the original. Still see some layering. We'll see what that looks like after it's painted. This is pretty close to the original. I need to do a little more work on those. I need to figure out how much of the arc actually needs to be present to get that as circular as it can be. I press fit the axles, but there's still probably too much play for this to stand on its own. And I had some more of those hex details that are the same gauge as the 1/4 inch stock. So, boom. This one's doubled up, and that helps to sell the fact that it didn't quite have a press fit all the way through. That same level of detailing is carried throughout. These are different than the filming model a little bit. This is very much present, including that. This is pretty close to the marking. You see that those were originally, these little dots were originally hex heads, and their upper layers got snaked off as I was working on them, so I just left them. There'll be enough there to see when it's painted. And I carried on the theme, and I think that sells the joints really very well. In this case, what we did was we put a bolt and a washer. And I've done that again elsewhere. There's this, you see this bolt head, and there's the end of the bolt and the nut. That panel is not quite faithful, and I have yet another version that updates it. There's more detail here than is necessary. That little wheel turns for what it's worth, and is very faithful to the real deal. More bolts and knobs all the way up, more or less in the positions on the original. I'm really pleased with this sort of thing that keeps the tension on the spring. I took a piece of dowel, put it in a vise, drilled a hole through it at an eccentric position, and then put the axle with some styrene tubing over it and made the paper joints. Those are going to just come right through on the real thing. The styrene strip is going to keep this curve, which was simply molded around something round until it looked right. This one, I don't know if you can see it or not, but this one, I broke, so I glued it back and it stayed. This bolt is, I think, the reverse on the filming miniature, but it still sells it. Finally, the Bandai kit has a bunch of ribbing and stuff up here, which is not present on the filming model, so I left it out. This is more or less to the mark. This is fairly partly cloudy. These are different because I ran out of little widgets, so I just made them up like that. There is some detail right here in this cutout. So again, the bolt, and we have the fender skirt for the joint, paper there to raise it up. The original, I need to cut those parts such that they're ready to size. I've been hand cutting the darn things. Finally, that's pretty close to the mark, and if I do things well, when I get the thigh going back here, that should stay stationary as this does this. So you see that there's full mobility in all of them, almost to where I can prevent it from going all the way through, but not nearly as strong as I'd originally intended. So these things are just, yeah, we got something here, guys. Painting will be the very last step in this guy. This is additional. It's not present on the filming model, but I just didn't like the blank. Nor is this. The back of these joints in the original is just dumb. This one, I did a real good job of getting all the way around there. Not so much. So, it is what it is. Next time, I'll make a more accurate mark. Legs. We have legs. I'm in the process of drawing the rest of the beastie. You saw the clip on how I created the thigh. I moved the parts onto big stock, and I'm turning out an entire, pair of legs with 3 sheets, I think. The feet thing is down to a science. So we're making progress. I really look forward to doing the next piece. This is going to be something.
All right, yeah, that's just fantastic. What I really love about our buddy build here is that each of us are really focusing on really different building techniques on building this same subject. So obviously what he's doing is literally creating a 3D model out of 2D images that he's layering upon layering and using his laser cutter to cut out the different parts, and then using his ingenuity to build up on those, like with the paper clay and things like that. So really, really incredible work, really quite amazing. And of course, I'm just focusing on painting and some plastic modifications and things like that on a plastic kit. So I think it's really interesting how two different modelers can come at the same subject and approach it in very different ways. And that's the beauty of it. I mean, you can really use your imagination and your artistry and accomplish different things, but make the same subject, you know, and do some similar things. So really happy with this build, really excited for what's coming up in the future. So stay tuned, and we will be showing more of that as we complete our different parts. Thanks again to my new subscribers. I went over 2,000 subscribers, so really happy with that. Stay tuned, and I'll be posting other videos on my other subjects as well. Thanks a lot.